Anything before we jump into the new business, we need to...
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I mentioned earlier in my report, I had a conversation with a resident about property maintenance and some potential zoning violations. And, while I understand, the residents' issue, I understand the owner's issue, and I certainly intend to help anybody that we can with any resources, but I also think it's important to uphold the beauty of our township. So I was just sort of curious what your thoughts were sort of on this issue going forward.
I think it's important. I mean, we have certain zoning restrictions or in place, and I think we have an obligation as trustees to sort of follow through on those complaints when they come up from residents. I think what's been sort of maybe missing in the past was some type of enforcement mechanism. You'd maybe reach out or talk to a resident and have some dialogue with them about whatever the issue was, and hope that they would, do their due diligence to correct the problem. But, those that don't, I mean, I think there hasn't been that enforcement mechanism or that step taken to sort of make sure that follow through does take place, and that we have like Trustee Lucci said, we have an obligation to ensure that, maintain the beauty of the township and make sure that people's, property is properly maintained and it's in good condition.
I agree. I mean, I think when I started really digging into, when I was campaigning 2 years ago and going door to door, I was surprised being a zoning commission member and knowing the zoning regs the way I did of some of the things that I saw. And so it's something I've been aware that we have, and I think over the last year I would agree, and I've seen more complaints or just heard more about it and seen more of the things that it really stands out to you once you notice that it's there. And I certainly think it's interesting that when we had our strategic planning, and Heather gave her department report as far as enforcing the zoning code, we got a little education on some stuff, but there was a session at the OTA that covered it, and an attorney, I actually missed the beginning of it, but she talked about actually had been the law firm that took through some of that stuff and talked about the things that they had done. And actually that slideshow showed some pretty nasty stuff, and thank goodness we don't really have that problem in Concord. But I think trying to address that from a standpoint of working with the community, but that, cleaning up, and certainly some of the complaints that we've had recently are properties that I've noticed for a long time. And I think it needs attention, and I think it's worthy of the township to make an effort to, and I think the first thing we need to do is probably just reach out and see what we can do to help people get into compliance. I certainly don't want to become, a very aggressive enforcement, like, well, okay, you're in trouble now, we want to work with people to do this, but we've got to think about everybody in the township, not just the residents that are being affected by the code, but people that have to drive by it, and the code's in place for a reason.
Right, or if they're a neighbor. I mean, we've all talked about certain complaints that we've received since we've been in office in regards to zoning violations, and they continue. So I think it's important, like you said, to sort of start that dialogue with the resident and do what we can to sort of move them towards getting into compliance, and whether or not we have to have some type of enforcement mechanism that we utilize. I mean, that's something we need to discuss, but I think we have an obligation to the residents to follow up on those complaints.
Ms. Lucci, when you spoke with the resident that did a complaint, how was her response? I mean, what was her tone? How did she take your report?
Well, I think the main thing was, safety is always an issue. Right. So, and of course, if you're living across the street from an area where it's, you have to look at it every day, the resident was very understanding, and look, her life wasn't going to change by looking across the street, but yet, certainly you have to live and be happy where you are, and if it's something is visually not appealing, you kind of want to do something about it. So again, I think safety is a big issue. Maintaining sort of what Concord represents is a big issue for me. So I think it is important that we have these discussions and we move forward in some direction to come to some sort of resolution on it.
Well, and I think you hit on something there, safety, and I think recalling what both Ms. Freeman and we learned on the OTA seminar was that enforcing this sometimes means going outside their code, so you're gonna rely on other agencies. We may have to work with the fire department as far as violations of the fire code, or the building department as far as health and welfare. Some of it may exceed that, some of these nuisance properties that we have, and that's, I use that word not because that's what ORC defines it as. So, I think it's something that is worthy of us to start exploring, gently start to frame it, so.
I agree.
All right, thank you.